Hi there, welcome. Today my name is Duncan Lloyd, winemaker at Coriole, and next to me is my brother.
Peter Lloyd, don't really do much, but just stand next to him. Sangiovese is what we're here for today, and with good reason. Sangiovese has been grown on this site here since 1985. So we have the oldest vines in the country of Sangiovese, and we have had an organic growth with Sangiovese. It now, 30 plus years later, is our most important wine, but that has been a long journey and a necessary one. Clonal diversity is very important with Sangiovese, as is site location or site selection. And we have three wines that we're looking at today that are necessarily quite different. And I guess the purpose of this video is to explain why.
Yeah, so I guess, very briefly, why Sangiovese? And we go back to the 80s, and it was our father Mark who really got interested in the variety. And I guess it comes down to a red wine that is more medium-bodied, and particularly back in those days it was Shiraz or Cabernet. So we're talking about a more medium-bodied red wine that still has great sort of savoury characters and structure and tannin on the palate, but can offer great interesting aromatics and diverse flavours as well, and really the perfect table wine. Great wine to accompany a lot of foods. So I guess briefly that is why Sangiovese, and as Peter said, has been a very important part of our Coriole's development over the past 30 years.
Early on in the late 80s, it wasn't an easy sell. There was no quality reference point for Sangiovese. Chianti, as we know it now, didn't have the high quality status that it does, and it was an obtuse style. This very dry, very savoury, medium-bodied red wine was a little difficult for the consumer to understand. Of course, we've all come a long way, and as has the status of Italian food and culture generally has now reached the pinnacle of dining in Australia. Some of the top restaurants are Italian, whereas 35 years ago it was typically cheap and cheerful. And so we've sort of come along with the ride, I guess, and as our wines have improved, so have the international examples as well, as more energy and resources are put into understanding what is a bit of a finicky grape variety.
Yeah, it definitely, I guess early on as well in the vineyard, it posed a few more, questions to the viticulturists and the growers, because it didn't behave like Shiraz or Cabernet did. It could crop higher, it could throw bigger bunches. We suddenly realised we needed to do a lot more shoot thinning, bunch thinning. It was prone to disease if it wasn't treated correctly. And that's probably actually helped our overall viticultural understanding a lot, and has also helped us have a good base once we've introduced new varieties in more recent years. But yeah, it's definitely really taught us a lot.
It's not a variety that you just plant and forget about. Some varieties are like that, but this requires a lot of energy and a lot of effort, and the journey continues. So our main wine here is the Sangiovese, which we term the New Australian Collection, which is really about a collection of wines that, whilst not new globally, are relatively new to Australia, and often we've been the pioneers of them in this country. When it comes to allocating wine to different products, with Sangiovese it's typically been quite a simple task, because you look at maybe 20 or 25 different parcels of Sangiovese that we vinify from different clones and different sites, and typically the combination of all of those parts is better than any single component. Shiraz is often very different, and you're pulling out small components here and there. So that's typically our approach, and not because it's just easiest, but that's just the way that the cookie crumbles. Saying that, we do have two very small volumes of wines that, within those tastings where we're assessing blind all of these different parcels, for whatever reason this has grabbed our attention, and this has typically grabbed our attention, albeit for very different reasons, which we'll go into in a minute. 2020 Sangiovese, Duncan?
So 2020 was a pretty nice vintage particularly for Sangiovese. It was a warmish start to the season, but then we had quite sort of cool conditions through the actual ripening period, and nice healthy canopies. So we just had a good balance of shading on fruit. So I think we've really retained great aromatics in 2020. I just instantly on the glass in the glass here is a lot of sort of cherry, sort of sage flower, but almost like some raspberry lifted red fruit aromatics.
Yeah, very red fruited,
which is really nice.
Nat list sits at about 14.1% alcohol. Typically we find for Sangiovese we need to be in the sort of 13.8 to 14.4 mark to achieve phenolic ripeness, so the ripeness of the tannin management is very important with Sangiovese. But this is really pitch perfect how we like it. Medium bodied, very savoury, aromatic, not overly so, but still lifted aromas, and a lovely, well balanced drying tannin that makes you crave food.
Yeah, you get that great lifted aromatics, but it's not all juby fruit. There's some sort of savoury herbal elements there, but it's still, and I think that freshness and almost crunchy acidity through the palate, particularly on a kind of warmer day like today, it's just sort of quite refreshing.
Yeah, very refreshing.
And it's got that great tannin as well to give awesome length.
So this is typically a blend from around 5 different vineyard sites across McLaren Vale, and so 5 or even 6 different soil types. And like I mentioned earlier, around a multi-clonal blend. So we work with around 7 main clones now. There has been some more in the past, but they've sort of come and gone. And an array of clones that we don't really need to go into. But it's very much a wine that is blended from a representative sample of McLaren Vale vineyards. The next wine is a very different take on Sangiovese. It's from our Laneway vineyard, which is planted in Wollonga in the foothills. So quite loose, open, free draining, relatively rich, fertile soil. Not like parts of the Coriole estate where we are now that are hard cap limestone, very tough soils. Here in the Wollonga vineyard, it's a little gentler and produces a slightly different style that we accentuate further with some winemaking techniques.
Yeah, so often this vineyard, like Pete said, it will be a bit more, approachable, particularly when looking at as a young wine. I guess we have a lot of discussions in the winery about the sort of tannin development and maturation of Sangiovese, because it is quite a feature of the variety. Not something compared to say something like Nero d'Avola, which is just sort of has very little tannin and just soft plush fruits. What makes Sangiovese great is that beautiful length of tannin. So anyway, talking about that, we're looking at some different techniques. So this was a parcel that, myself and assistant winemaker Andy were talking about something else we could try. And so this was sort of an extended maceration, so extended time on skins. So it finished its fermentation. It had no sugar left, but we left it on its skins, and it stayed there for about 35 days, I think, in the end.
As a reference point, typically these parcels would ferment on skins from anywhere from 8 to 14 days.
So a bit of longer time. So you really see a bit of a change. Almost, it's sort of counterintuitive, even though you're spending longer on the skins where the tannins are present. You are also seeing a sort of a softening of the structure as well, and it's kind of forming longer chains of tannins, which then can precipitate out of the wine. But also a really lovely, quite aromatic, but slightly different. It's almost got that sort of blood orange Campari character on the nose at the moment.
Yeah, and it has a Pinot-like perfume as well. It's very fragrant, and although the tannin is not reminiscent of Pinot Noir, its body is sort of light to medium rather than medium plus body. So it's quite an ethereal wine. It's really lovely, fragrant, light. A wine to put in a nice glass and mull over without really rich foods. You'd maybe just some Parma ham or some lighter charcuterie would work well. But it is quite a delicate and ethereal expression of Sangiovese rather than rustic, rich and full, which the next wine is certainly more in that vein.
Yeah, I think for me with that Laneway, I'd call it a sort of an effortless volume about the wine, which really really stands out. It's not a big punchy, full of heavy fruits, but it's just got this great volume and sort of texture,
gentle
across
spread
the whole mouth.
across the palate.
Yeah, a really interesting style of Sangiovese that we've been pretty excited about getting this one into bottle and getting out to you guys.
In a way, it's probably the least typically Sangiovese-like of the three, but a lovely wine.
So this last wine is, we're going back to a 2018, and a wine that some of you may have enjoyed in the past, which is our Vita Reserve Sangiovese. So I guess this is probably a more classic look at some of the best parcel that we identify in the year, but we'll typically show a bit more body, a bit more structure, a bit more grunt, and really looking at a style with a bit more sort of ageability, I guess, as well in its characters.
This is off the 1985 planting, and we call it's the contour planting, in that it stretches around the hill rather than being planted up and down. It's a very early way of dealing with slopes. So it means it can't be mechanised. It's a bit of a pain, really. Everything has to be hand-picked, and therefore it's very expensive, etc. But you get, and it's quite tough soils, so shallow soils onto limestone, and so you get a very concentrated wine, albeit, it's medium plus. It's not full-bodied, but very concentrated, very savoury. And this particular clone, which is H6V9, which was the original clone that was available here, is quite a rustic, savoury clone. So you get lots of leather, lots of cured meats. You still get lovely fruit, but there's a whole other array of savoury aromas and flavours. So it is truly a multi-dimensional wine in that sense, albeit medium plus body.
Yeah, it's probably a bit more sort of gravelly, I guess, and rustic in its tannin. There's still a great presence of sort of almost plum-like fruit on the nose, but yeah, like I said, some of those sort of great savoury characters too, and definitely has a bit more impact in terms of its fruit on the palate, and a larger frame, I guess. It's got a bit more a bit sort of wider, expansive tannin, so it really will work. Will cellar for a long time and will work with richer dishes, heavier dishes.
Yeah, so completely different styles, and that's the interesting thing. That's what keeps us interested and stimulated, and hopefully you get to try them side by side. Like I said, they're polar opposites, so make sure you know what food you want with what. But yeah, just a little window into the work that goes on behind the scenes with Sangiovese. These are very, very small bottlings, 2 or 3 barrels of each produced. Both show their style, albeit very different.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I guess it's great, really interesting for us, and we're very passionate about Sangiovese here at Coriole, and really keen on its future for McLaren Vale. So we're pretty excited to have these 3 wines out and to kind of further explore the variety, and I hope everyone enjoys.
Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.